Good morning. My name's Pete Elman. I'm a lifetime rock and roll musician. I live here in Oakland. I'm also a teacher and a writer, and I'm a big rock and roll fan as well. And this will be my first OLLI class, and I'm really excited to teach it. The title of the class is Turn, Turn, Turn. It's a chronological and musical road trip through the golden era of American rock and roll, 1955 to 1975. And what will the class cover? Well, briefly, it's going to cover that golden age, those 20 years. And I'm going to teach it somewhat chronologically and geographically across several regions where these key American musical movements sprung up. Plus, I'll have a one-week exploration of Bob Dylan's great 1965 records. And we're going to take a journey through those places which were at the forefront of rock and roll. And what is the class goal? Well, my goal is to enlighten some people who probably already know a lot about this subject and probably love it as much as I do, as to some of the nuances of different styles and how they relate to each other musically and geographically and culturally and chronologically, and of course to have a lot of fun. So what's going to happen inside each class? Well, the best thing is it's going to be taught right here at the Freight and Salvage, and we're going to take advantage of this great stage, this wonderful big screen, and the terrific sound system here. And so what's going to happen in each class? Well, it's not always going to be the same, but the loose structure is I'll talk a little bit about some of the artists and some of the songs from those periods. I've dug up some really cool photographs and put some kind of funny, silly captions, which I think some of you will like, to those photographs. Some charts I've created, some trees of music and stuff, some maps, and of course some stories. I'll play a few cuts each class from CDs, from selected songs that I think are important from that era. And I'll show some really nice archival film clips that I've dug up about several of these artists and people that made this music. And I'm also going to do something a little bit different than most kind of history of music classes. I'm going to sing and play. I play the piano and guitar and sing, and I'll do a couple of tunes right here on the stage for each class, and I'm going to want people to sing along if they want to sing along, and hopefully you will. And there's going to be a question and answer period where people can offer their comments and critiques and hopefully some of their reminiscences. And I really want this class to be a participatory class. And maybe if we have some time, we could do some interactive fun stuff. Real quick, what happens in these weeks? Well, week one is all about New Orleans and the Deep South, and we talk about Fats Domino and Chuck Berry and Little Richard and how those formative years of rock and roll kind of established what came later. Week two is one of my favorites. I'm going to go up the Mississippi to Memphis and talk about rockabilly and sing a couple rockabilly tunes, Elvis and Buddy Holly and one of my heroes, Jerry Lee Lewis. And then we go over to New York City for the great songwriters, the Brill Building, and the great producers like Phil Spector, and examine what those people did that made such a lasting contribution to the great American songbook. And week four, we're going to double back to Memphis, Tennessee, and talk about the creation and spread of soul music, Stax Volt, and Sam and Dave, and the great Otis Redding and Wilson Pickett, and talk about James Brown and some of those movements which really defined what would come later. And of course, what would a class be without a migration to Motown, and talk about Hitsville and the great records and the great songs that were created during the mid-60s and early 70s by Berry Gordy's company. And the last week, as I referenced, will be about Bob Dylan and his two great rock and roll albums. And I'll also spend some time talking about the band. I know we have a lot of people who love the band. And finally, this is a 6-week class, but part two is 4 weeks, and that's going to happen in June. And that's really important because that'll talk about LA and the San Francisco sound, and it's kind of piggybacking on these first 6 weeks. And I just want to leave you with a couple of ideas that, music, we all know, and Susan has reminded me of this, it keeps us young. And rock and roll is kind of one of those kinds of music that really keeps us young. So I hope to see all of you here April Fool's Day, Wednesday. Looking forward to it.
Peter, thank you.